Hi everybody, foXnoMad here, and today I want to help you travel smarter by sharing a recent episode of the foXnoMad podcast with you. My guest today is Irena Chalupa. She spent 23 years working at Radio Free Europe in Germany, the Czech Republic, and Ukraine as the director of the Ukrainian Service. Since then, she's worked as an editor and producer at StopFake, which is a fact-checking website. We talk about the war in Ukraine, what it's like to cover disinformation that's coming out of the conflict, as well as the importance of pronouncing Ukrainian cities properly and how to pronounce them properly as well. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the foXnoMad podcast with Irena Chalupa. All right. Thank you, Irena, for joining me on today's episode. I wanted to talk to you about something which may seem inconsequential considering that there is a war going on, but it's about the semantics. Because as I hear on the news, I've heard, for example, the word Kiev, pronounced Kiev, and Kiev. And I at first I thought maybe the journalists who are reporting on this are getting it incorrect. You know, the pronunciation is incorrect. But I've come to learn that that's not the case. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about why the pronunciation is different. How do we pronounce that city, and why the spelling of it has also changed now for a lot of English speakers from KIEV to KYIV.
Right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Anil. The practically everyone mispronounces the Ukrainian capital, and I find that really quite shocking because these are big multimedia companies, NPR, CNN. It's very easy to sort of Google things, find pronunciation guides online, and there are plenty of people who are Ukrainians who live in America who would be more than happy to help with the pronunciation. To sort of understand why the spelling has changed and why Ukrainians are sensitive about how their capital is pronounced, you need a little bit of history. Ukraine has basically been enslaved by Russia for many years, for centuries actually. Eastern Ukraine was part of the Tsarist Russian Empire for over 300 years. The Russian system, whether it was imperial or Soviet, went out of their way to annihilate Ukrainian culture, the Ukrainian language, and so forth and so on. The spelling that we've been used to in the West, Kiev, is the Russian way of pronouncing the name of Ukraine's capital. And just a little bit of sort of potted and quick history, the name Kyiv comes from history. Historically, we have been taught that the city was founded by three brothers and a sister, Kei, Shchek, and Khoriv, and their sister's name was Libit. And the city that they founded, that the eldest brother, whose name was Kei, founded, was named Kyiv in honor of his name. Now, Kiev is the Russian way of pronouncing the name of the city. It's the Russian word for Kyiv. After Ukrainian independence, Ukrainians all over the world started paying a little bit more attention to how their names were being pronounced and how they were being spelled. So there was a concerted effort to stop using the article the. You may recall there was a time when people said the Ukraine. Well, the Ukraine is wrong, always has been. And thankfully, that is something that people have abandoned. And everyone now says Ukraine because the Ukraine kind of relegates it to some sort of small little region. It's an outpost of something, and it's not a proper country. It's not a separate entity in and of its own right. In Ukrainian, the capital is pronounced Kyiv. It's two syllables. And most of the newscasters, moderators, presenters, anchors mispronounce it. They say Kyiv. NPR, I sent them an really irate letter because they all say Kyiv. It's not. It is two syllables. Kyiv. The first A sound is like in the word big. And the ending sort of like yield, the same sound, except with a V at the end. Kyiv. Some people use a kind of a drier way of saying it, Kyiv, which I think is not very nice sounding. So Kyiv, it's quite easy, Kyiv. So NPR, listen up, get it right.
And there's also this city in the west, which I will mispronounce, Lviv,
Lviv?
which is, yes.
Uh-huh.
And is it the
Yes.
same situation there where
That's a little bit of a tougher one because in Ukrainian, we have something called the soft sound. It's a little letter that looks like the number 6. And if you put that letter after a consonant, it softens the consonant. So an N will be a N, like the Spanish with the tilde, in mañana. An L will become a L. An S will become a Sh. And this is how Lviv is spelled. It's L and then the soft sound and VIV. So the closest that I can think of uh, is Lviv. So it's you almost have to put in some sort of a vowel in between Lviv. But the proper way is just a L, I call them a wet L's, so it's a wet L and Viv. And it's like Vive, Viva la France or something like that. I mean, I think if people just practice a little bit and concentrate, it'll be easier. What really gets my goat, well, everything gets my goat sometimes, but accents, for example. Another city that has been in the news is a city called Kharkiv, which is in eastern Ukraine. It's 30 kilometers from the Russian border, and it's been battered by the Russian army considerably. And everyone says Kharkiv, Kharkiv, and that's just wrong. It's Kharkiv. The accent is on the first syllables.
And it's um I lost my train of thought for a second. Oh, what I was going to say. um yeah, to play devil's advocate. So let's say Germany, in English is Germany, in German it's Deutschland, and there are many countries obviously, and when you change it to English, there's a different
Right.
version. How is this different? How is it different? For example, let's say if Kiev is the quote unquote English way, or the Russian
Mhm.
way that's been Anglified, how is that different? And why is that important?
Well, I think it's important because the country has a right to ask the world to pronounce its name and its cities a certain way. We used to call Burma Burma until it became Myanmar. Everybody used to say Peking until it became Beijing. So I fully believe that it's the country's right to have a say in how its names, how the names of their cities and how the name of the country is pronounced. It's as simple as that.
And is there a good
Don't you think that's reasonable?
Yeah, I think so. Turkey is going through this in their tourism right now, where they're
Mm,
trying to change it to the Turkish way to say Turkey, which is Türkiye,
hmm.
which I don't know if it will stick because, but who knows?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, it's when you think back about where these names and pronunciations began, what were they driven by? A lot of times these were issues of empire, issues of control, and so I fully support people's countries' right to have a say in how they are perceived um, in their names. I think it's right. I mean, I'm not sure about Turkey. Um, Turkey is a free country. Nobody is persecuting Turkey. Turkey determines what Turkey is and how it should be perceived and viewed by people. Is it important for it to be in German it's Türkei? How is it in Turkish?
Türkiye.
Turkey. Well, I can tell you, Americans are going to have a really hard time with that with with the umlauts. So
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of linguistic butchery about.
And when you look at the history, it's literally about the bird. So it's kind of an interesting history. There are a couple of countries in the world that when you change their name, it means Turkey, and it's all because of
Mhm.
the actual bird. So,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
less obviously less important politically than it is in Ukraine's situation.
Hmm.
What are some good resources? Where can people find out how to pronounce these names?
A lot of it is just as simple as doing a Google search. I have seen a couple of videos where linguists have done little presentations, how to pronounce Kiev and various other things. If that fails, type in, if you're somewhere, type just type in Ukrainian organizations in the area, and you'll find somebody, and you can reach out to them, and they will help you. I think that that's probably the easiest. I don't know of any. complete guide to pronunciation. Um, I have to say that certain things have changed and become a little bit easier. For example, when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, you and your listeners probably know that the communists had a penchant for naming cities after their big dealers, big communists. So there was Dzerzhinsky, who was the founder of the secret police, Felix Dzerzhinsky. He had several cities named after him. Dzerzhinsky, that's already a mouthful, right? We had a city in Ukraine called Dnipro-Dzerzhinsk. Ain't nobody in their right mind able to pronounce that except a native. So thankfully they changed the name to that of that city. So yeah, there's still an awful lot of work to do. Ukraine is, since the Russians first invaded Ukraine in 2014 and took Crimea and occupied swathes of territory in the east, Ukraine underwent this, it's not a completed process, but they have been decommunizing. So they've been changing names of their cities from communist names to something that has more of a historic connection to the area, to the people, using historic figures, for example, to name cities. Excuse me, and so forth. So they've been, I'm not sure if any of the motivation for changing these names is driven by making it easier for foreigners to pronounce. Unlikely, but it's more of a kind of a righting a historic wrong situation. So, but I think yeah, I think people have a right to determine what they want their cities and towns to be called.
And is this a debate about the pronunciations? I guess debate in the English media, I'll say, is that something that is being highlighted now because of the war, or is this something that has been kind of going on in the Ukrainian community, trying to bring awareness to these names and semantics, but it's just gotten more recognition now, or is it something that's a new, a sort of topic?
Well, by virtue of the war, all Ukrainian names are in the center of people's attention. The Ukrainian diaspora, the Ukrainian immigrant community has been very, very vocal and quite active about having the removed and having the capital spelled the Ukrainian way. But I would generally say that the Western media has a difficulty with certain foreign names, whether it's names of cities, surnames. There is just a difficulty. They butcher Russian names as well. There are a lot of sports people who are quite big, like Sharapova, for example. They pronounce her as Sharapova, and I just don't think that it's so difficult to find either a native speaker or someone who speaks Russian fluently, to say these things properly. And the Ukrainian as well. For example, Volodymyr, the name of the Ukrainian president, his first name is Volodymyr. The Russian variant of that name is Vladimir. I've heard them, I've heard people say on, you know, um, high profile, big media companies call him Vladimir, which I'm sure that he would not be particularly happy about at this point. So it's just, do you know how many times people call me Irina, which is the Russian way of pronouncing my name, even though I deal with them, they see how I spell it, and they never do it properly. I think it's just a certain amount of English speaking laziness. If it ain't John, it's complicated for them. So it's a way to try to learn these names. So yeah, I think that they need to pay a little bit more attention to it. The producers have to stop being so lazy and do a little bit of legwork and get it right. But I think clearly every time there's a conflict, these kinds of issues become maybe a little bit more pronounced. I mean, obviously, pronunciation takes second place to the war. I mean, we want the war to stop and we want the Russians to stop killing Ukrainians and get the hell out of the country, and then we'll worry about pronunciation. But sometimes the two go step in step.
Yeah, and I always thought, and I when I watch sports, when I watch the news, and I hear a name mispronounced or just pronounced differently by everybody, I'm like, they don't know how to pronounce this name
Yeah,
or this place. I always thought, and I think, a big news organization should have just a linguist on hand. Like that should just be
absolutely,
standard. But it seems
absolutely.
like it's definitely not the case.
Hmm. And so you kind of ask yourself, why is that? Is that do they do they not place any importance on this, or is it just uh, carelessness? Is it intentional? I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just laziness in a hurry to sort of get the story out. Do you remember when the Saudi journalist was murdered,
Hmm.
Khashoggi?
Hmm.
Well, some presenters, some newscasters said Khashoggi, others said Khashoggi. It's to this day I don't know what the proper way of pronouncing that poor man's name is. So yeah, I think I believe that this is an important thing. Obviously, it's not the number one issue, but it is important. It's part of the story. It always is part of the story.
Yeah, and I think, transitioning into your work at Stop Fake, I honestly think that it makes you not trust the media as much when they can't get a name right. I mean,
Uh,
it's a
mhm.
basic thing. Especially if you're a native speaker and you hear them and you go, if they can't get the name right, like if they didn't do that tiny bit of research,
Mhm.
what else are they getting wrong? I think it feeds into that narrative that we can't trust the media, which is going on a lot now.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Anil. I never actually thought of that until you pointed it out. And yeah, it absolutely is the case. So hopefully they'll be a little bit more careful about these kinds of things in the future. So,
And speaking of misinformation, which
mm.
is kind of a big thing these days,
Oh God,
we
it's
have
an
access
understatement.
we have access to literally all the information we want, whether it's true or not, right? We can Google anything and get an answer to our question, and the answer can agree with us. How do we know something is real and something is fake? How do we like just take a basic, a general massive question like that? How do we know?
Well, there are several ways of doing it. First of all, you should never turn off your critical thinking switch. That should always be on, and common sense as well. We can all get lost in some sort of an echo chamber of our own invention, of someone else's invention. We can go into some sort of a comfort zone, whether it's a comfort zone of truth or a comfort zone of lies. We can all choose to do that. However, I believe that a person really has to be as open-minded as possible in today's day and age. There is a way of finding the truth if you just spend a little bit of time, and actually not a huge amount of time. People, there's this kind of backlash from radical right groups in America and probably the world over against what they call the mainstream media, the lying mainstream media. Well, I'm sorry, but the mainstream media get it right more often than they get it wrong. And they continue to do that. These are, the New York Times, CNN, the Washington Post, LA Times, all of our major newspapers have been around for many, many, many years, and they know the formula. They know how it works. I trust them up to a point. Of course, there are mistakes. People make mistakes. Some journalists lie. They are outed and then fired. Obviously, we've seen that happen at the New York Times. But generally, their information is reliable. It's fact checked, and it's true. There are also steps and procedures that media go through to verify information. I think people don't understand that. I worked with a journalist from the New Yorker a couple of years ago, helping him with some translations and a few other things. about a story that was Ukraine-based, Ukraine-driven, and it is amazing what how rigorous the editorial process is at that publication. I think a lot of people would be very surprised about that. How much back and forth there is between editors and fact checkers and the writers and so forth and so on. So people are extremely, extremely careful about these stories. I, as a consumer of news, I have several sources that I trust. Ukrainian sources, British sources, American sources, German sources. And I have to go back to the classic media. The classic media, I think, do a decent job. There are, in the last 10 years or so, we've had a lot of new media pop up, publications like the Daily Beast, a lot of these aggregator sites and so forth and so on. They are very interesting because they give you a selection of different types of viewpoints. A publication can be liberal, another publication can be conservative, and so forth and so on. I have no specific advice to offer to people, but my basic advice would be think. If you read something and it sounds somewhat outrageous, it probably is outrageous for a reason, because somebody wants to sway you into thinking a certain way. Don't take just one story or one headline or one viewpoint as fact. It's not etched in stone. Check other sites out. Do a little bit of searching. Don't be gullible. Don't be gullible. Put on your thinking hat. As I said, make sure your critical thinking switch is on, and just learn as much as you can. This is, with Google and various other search engines and so forth and so on, we have a lot of real and true information at our disposal. So don't be lazy. Don't eat the lies that you are being fed, because it's really bad for your health. It will not only make you stupid and a tool of somebody, it also it's bad for your psychological health to believe in lies and to sort of live in a community of lies. You are weakened by that, because then you are being manipulated by those lies. And if you are being manipulated, you're not in control of yourself. You're not in control of your destiny. You're not in control of your life. People can do things with you that are extremely, extremely dangerous. Look at people in Russia don't believe that there's a war going on in Ukraine. They believe that there are Nazis running around the country, killing Russians. It just is not happening. But they believe it. And this is the danger. We are just one step away from the modern day equivalent of Nazi Germany.
And it seems like the bigger the lie, the more inclined we are as a public to believe it, because we can't believe that someone could tell such a big lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, how do we get out of this cycle, and how do we it seems like the lies would get smaller with misinformation, but it really does seem like they get bigger, right?
They get bigger. Yeah, they get bigger. And I'm not really sure why they get bigger, but they do get bigger. And I have to, my personal view is that the Trump presidency fed into that very much, very much. The big lie that people are still repeating ad nauseum, that Trump won the election and it was stolen by Biden. You don't steal elections in America, okay? It does not happen. We don't have voter fraud. These things are just contrived fakes. And you are absolutely right. The more you repeat it, the more it becomes, well, it doesn't become real, but you kind of get used to it. So suddenly there it is, there it is the 400-pound gorilla, or whatever that expression is. And you're skirting around it. And when Donald Trump was president, when his campaign of lies, was there during the campaign, but I don't know if everybody was afraid to say the president of the United States is lying. I was, as I was reading newspapers, watching watching news and so forth and so on, the word lie was never used. They never used the word lie. Nobody called him a liar, which is what he was and what he continues to be. It was only later, as his presidency was winding down and it became clear that he, thankfully, was not reelected, that the word started to be used. And I think that that is very, very important. You have to call things by their names. A lie is a lie. It's not a artificial truth. There's no such thing. It's like when what's it, Kellyanne Conway came up with alternative facts. What the hell is that? Snow is white. Okay, that's a fact. And there's nothing in the world that can change that, except maybe a dog, so then it becomes yellow. But it's but these kinds of things, when we're going into this Orwellian speak, we're going into very, very dangerous territory, because then everything is capable to be able to be manipulated. Everything is malleable, everything is fake, everything has the potential to be a fake. Now, mind you, we live in a world of certain fakes, but they're not quite fakes. It's sort of artifice. Like, I'm gray, but I dye my hair blonde, so it's fake hair. Women have beautiful nails that are fake, all sorts of things. People get facial surgery, so they look young, but maybe they're a lot older, all of this sort of stuff. But these are not fakes that kill people. Do you know what I mean? These are fakes that improve people's lives and give them a little bit more self-confidence or so. Or I don't know, if you're a Hollywood star, they get you jobs. But these kinds of other dangerous fakes, I think they're going to be around for a long time now, with video manipulation, with these deep fakes. It's a dangerous time, I believe. And I think people have to be vigilant. You really have to be vigilant. You have to be vigilant, and you shouldn't trust everything simply because it's there, simply because you found it online. The internet is a cesspool of lies, but it is also, a great island of truth. You just have to know where to look, and you have to be vigilant and careful.
And how does a fact-checking organization check facts? I've always wondered that, like how, you know,
Our fact checkers work the way all fact checkers work. You do searches, you cross-reference things. If there's a claim made by, let's say, a Russian minister or some public figure or whatever, accusing X, Y, and Z of something, you go to the source, you go to the person that's being accused, you go to their website, you reach out to them, you get comments, you double check. It's sort of like gossip. If your friend comes to you and you say, oh, did I think Joe is sleeping with his best friend's wife or something like that, or they've stolen money. You kind of, there are ways, and a lot of it is very, very sort of common sense. You don't believe it until you see it. The Bible and St. Thomas, and so, but there are standard ways of doing it. You go to the source, you double check, you try to find direct quotes. A lot of times fakes are not necessarily some sort of a concocted story, but a phrase taken out of context. So you go, let's say a speech, for example, that was given by a president or a congressman or a senator or something like that. And you go and you read the complete text, and you can see what this phrase actually means and what this person actually meant. We recently had a fake where they took a phrase out of one of Biden's speeches, and they claimed that Biden was accusing Ukraine of not being prepared for the war, or sort of disregarding warning signs and so forth and so on. And it was just, they took, again, it was one phrase taken completely out of context. Uh, Also, the more outrageous the headline, the more likely it is to be a fake. So beware of these headlines, because they're clickbait. They want you to come in and read some of these things. And I I play games with myself when it comes to certain Russian fakes, for example. When I'm checking and I'm working on a story and I check the original and I go I go back to their original. And more often than not, the source that they send you back to is not the person that they're quoting. It's not the organization that they're quoting. It's another one of their stories that is uh, one of the sources of the fake. So it's like an onion. You got to keep peeling it, peeling it, peeling it until you get back, until you get to some semblance or kernel of truth. And sometimes there's nothing there. It's just, it's a complete fallacy. So just again, I have to say it has to be common sense. You know, you really have to rely on your common sense and general knowledge. You have to know a little bit of history. I think, you know, we live in a day and age where we need to be better educated, as not just as citizens, but as consumers of news. If something sounds like a crazy story, then it is a crazy story. It's probably not true.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I think in Sweden, I'm pretty sure I had read that they now have it as part of their curriculum in schools, and I
Yes.
think at a very early age how to decipher media,
Yeah.
which I think is an
It's
interesting.
called media literacy, they call it. And actually I believe on Stop Fake, on our website, on the Stop Fake website, we have a couple of tools for recognizing fakes and how you should process information. And there are like what is it, TinEye, which is a reverse image site, reverse image search engine database. And so there are a lot of tools out there. People just have to educate themselves about them, and just stop reading trashy sites. You know, stop reading trashy sites. Another, this is nobody's actually said this, but my experience has been, if a news site of any sort, if all they do is scream and shout, if they speak in these, you know, very, very raised tones and everything's excited and semi-hysterical, it's bound to be fake. It's bound to be BS.
It's a good, I guess, litmus test.
Yeah.
And you mentioned some of the software tools. I was going to ask you about that because it does mention on the Stop Fake site that software tools are used, and that
Mm-hmm.
sort of piqued my interest. Like, what kind of tools? How do we? What's being used to decipher?
Well, TinEye is a good one. That's one of these reverse image tools. And if you see a photograph and it is purported to be, I don't know, let's say, uh, if you see a photograph that you have some doubts about, just copy it and put it into this tool, and this tool has the capacity to get to the original. Now, mind you, not everything is there. They have a limited amount of photographs, but that is there. um, Quotes, I mean, Google does a very, very reasonable job of finding real quotes. But the image site, I think, is very, very important, because stories are illustrated with images, with photographs, and very often, particularly in Russian media, the photographs that they use have nothing to do with the story. Absolutely nothing. They are an image that is taken from a completely different place. For example, photographs from Syria have been used to illustrate fake stories since the war began in Ukraine. I'm not an expert in these things, but I have used TinEye several times to identify photographs. You know, the average person isn't going to be doing all of this sort of stuff. Fact checkers will be using these tools more than the average person. The average person just has to be a little bit more skeptical about everything that they read.
Yeah, and I think there's a sort of alluring factor to getting alternative news, right? Like, oh, I know something that other people don't. So while they're looking at the major news sites, I'm looking at this other website and I know the truth, but other people don't, because there's this human nature to follow the crowd, but there's also a good feeling when we rebel. And I feel like that's part of it, to say, oh, I'm not watching what everyone else is watching. I get, this secret news. So I kind of have a knowledge which is unique and maybe more valuable. Um, and I think the internet makes that very possible because everybody can put an opinion online. I mean, it's all out there. Um, One of the more controversial things I have ever posted, which I didn't think at the time, was whether or not you can see the curvature of the Earth when you're flying in a plane. So I was just curious. The answer is no. If you're in a
Mm.
passenger plane, the curvature is from the window. It's very slight. You might be able to see it if you're in the pilot's deck, but the comments were all, there's no curvature because the Earth is flat. And I decided to take this. I was like, okay, I got so many comments about it. I was like, let me see, can I convince myself to be a flat earther? And I went to all the sites and everything. But every explanation required like 5 or 10 more explanations because the earth is not flat. So,
Yeah.
when you have all this evidence to the contrary, you have to make more evidence to refute the evidence. And it's just a rabbit hole, like they say. Um, do you, I guess, as a final note, are you optimistic we will get out of this, or is this getting worse?
I don't know. I really don't know. My hopeful side wants to be optimistic, but um, my sort of experienced side is shocked and appalled at the willingness of large parts of our society to just go down this slippery slope of ignorance. I'm shocked. I am shocked at what has been happening with COVID, with this whole anti-vaxxer movement, with the stupidity, no, with the ignorance that so many people are embracing. I'm shocked at the level of intentional ignorance of some of our elected officials. I am simply appalled by it. Appalled. And for a number of years, I have felt that we are sliding into a modern age, dark age, where it's going to be a Mad Max world. I don't want that. I really don't want that. I I have to believe that the better instincts in our natures will prevail, and that will not happen. There are people in this world that, for some reason or another, are just willing to stop thinking, stop learning, stop sort of processing information, and just suspend disbelief and go into some weird la la land. And I do not understand it. I I understand it on some level because I have a degree in psychology, but I find it extremely frightening. And I have family members who are, uh, they're not flat earthers, but they believe in things that are just outrageous, unconscionable. Just, thank God we live in different states, but I don't understand what has happened, what kind of a uh, microbe or bacilla or something has taken hold of us. But at the same time, I see young people like you and various others, wizards at technology who are doing a great job about opening up people's minds and teaching them, taking them to different places and so forth and so on. So I don't know. Um, I think that the people who make this great technology have to develop a more of a social conscience. They have to realize that with these products, with these platforms, comes a certain amount of responsibility. In some way, um, IT companies are a bit like gun manufacturers. Right? Their the things that they produced, can be used for good things, or they can be used for extremely horrible things. And we have to somehow address those issues. And the internet, the World Wide Web, is a democratic platform. Everybody has equal access to it, and you can do whatever you want with it. But I mean, let's think of it like a car. People who don't know how to drive are not allowed to get behind the wheel. So I'm not saying that we need some sort of a course, but we need some sort of experience, discerning ways of dealing with all of this. And it has to be something that people, maybe they need to learn it in school. Maybe we need to take an example from the Swedes and insist that we have these media literacy classes for our young people here. But I don't know. Ask me that question in 10 years. Maybe I'll have a better answer for you. Right now, I'm sort of 50-50. I'm hoping for the best. I'm expecting the worst, but hoping for the best.
That is one of my favorite quotes. I really like that quote. Hopefully, in 10 years, it is better. I think, like we had discussed kind of before we started recording, that technology is one of those things that we could have paradise right now. We could feed every human being on the planet.
Yes.
We could. We don't, which is a shame, but we could. And the internet is kind of the same thing. We have access to basically, I just imagine Isaac Newton time traveling to now, and he would be like, this is the most amazing thing ever. Like I can, so hopefully it does get better. I'm rooting for the 50% of you that is optimistic.
Well, I am as well, but no, ultimately, Anil, I have to say that I do have faith in mankind. I think we're a very flawed species, but I think that the majority of humanity is good, and just for that, it deserves to exist. And so maybe 51-49. Okay.
Okay, getting better. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our
It's
conversation.
my pleasure. I enjoyed talking to you as well. Please reach out whenever.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much again. You've cleared up many questions I think a lot of us have had. I think it's going to make us more educated both on pronunciation and the importance of pronunciation. And I really do hope the news organizations get better at this, because it is frustrating.
It's a detail, but it's a significant detail, and it's kind of, it colors the entire package, the entire story, and I think that they should pay better attention to it. Yeah.
I think we're now looking for it. So now we know who's saying it right and who's not saying these places right, and hopefully they'll get some tweets or something that they're like, hey.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you very much again. I really
You're more than
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching this episode of the foXnoMad podcast. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons down below. I'll have new episodes for you every week, and I'll see you in the next video.